Hello there, Qckslvrslash here, and today I have a review of the Alabama, the new Tier 8 Premium American Battleship. And no, this is not some sort of April Fool's video. I'm honestly getting a little tired of them. April Fool's is supposed to end at like noon, isn't it? It's 6 p.m. and people are still posting crap. Anyways, the Alabama. Initial impressions, I love the ship. That's right out of the gate. I'm about a dozen games in. I streamed a whole ton of them yesterday, and I've just had a really fun time. And that shouldn't come as a surprise, because the North Carolina I really enjoyed. And the ships share a lot of similarities. But we're going to dig in and really just look at the Alabama, and I'm actually going to compare it a bit to the Tirpitz, because the pair of them are really your options for Tier 8 premium battleships. And if you're looking for one or the other and you're in both lines, maybe this can offer some help on which one to choose. So right off the bat, survivability, it's not too bad. 79 points, 63,000 hit points. When you look at the Tirpitz though, 69,000. And you'll see a bit of a trend there. The armor, 32 millimeters to 315, 24% torpedo duct production. On the Alabama, 16 to 310, but a 50% torpedo reduction. These nice bulges down the side, really mitigating that torpedo damage. But you have to dive a little deeper to really understand what's going on with the armor. So from the bow, looks like a pretty standard American ship. But when you strip away that first outer plating, these forward bulkheads, the upper port, 287, 156, and then the sides, they vary between 168 and 310. The 310, though, sticks very high above the waterline, which when you look at the Tirpitz, it's got 315. Yeah, sure, it sticks up, but it's a lot higher. And that chunk, as you can see, looking nose on, this is that infamous turtleback. And what those are is plates to protect the real citadel. Up here is not the citadel. That is. When you look at the Alabama, that really is kind of the entry into the citadel. And that's a bit of the difference in the design. And that's why German ships are so strong to those penetrations. But where the Alabama is definitely a lot weaker is in the stern. 16 millimeters from the stern, which means if you're sailing away and someone's dropping shells at you, they very likely could get in to the stern of your ship. And furthermore, this citadel above the water pretty much runs, well, it does run, from just ahead of gun number 1 all the way to just after gun number 3. So she definitely has her weak points, but like a lot of Americans, if you put the bow in, kind of this angle, you're going to do okay. But angling is going to be very important in this ship. Now, as far as the guns, 406s, 3 triple-barreled turrets, pretty much identical to the North Carolina, or at least on the surface, they seem identical. They list as the same gun, but there's some differences. And the differences make all the difference. If you look at the initial shell velocity, in the AP it's 701. When you look at the North Carolina, it's the same. And that's where you start, comparing it to these Germans, that these American ships, have a bit more difficulty at range, in a sense, in that they've got that lower initial shell velocity. The flip side to that means at very long outer ranges of their guns, the shells are coming in nearly vertically. It means you're getting a lot of plunge and fire, which if you adjust your aim correctly is very good. Now, the other difference between the Carolina and the Alabama is the sigma dispersion. There's like a 0.1 difference, and it's not huge. And I honestly haven't really noticed the dispersion to be that poor. But the rest of the stats, pretty much what you'd expect. Reload time, 30 seconds, 180 degree, 32.7. Granted, Steven Seagal is in this ship, but the turrets actually turn reasonably quick. Maximum dispersion, 271. compare that to, my North Carolina, once again, different captain, 293, 30, and 38.3. The Alabama's guns are maybe a little more responsive. The rest of the damage and stats are pretty much the same, and the Alabama can reach pretty far, and 21.1 can be buffed with the right mods. Now, as far as AA, with the right modules and skills, you can get 100 rating, which is what you expect out of an American ship. This thing can eat through aircraft, to the point where this is one of the few battleships that I've actually mounted the scouting plane on. For the most part, I run the fighter because I really like to break those torpedo squadrons up. The Alabama, I've been confident and been able to just forgo that for the spotting. Because the reality is, tier kind of 6, 7, 8 carriers, you're going to knock a lot of them down. And if you're playing smart and with a bunch of your ships, you're not going to have a problem cutting into them. If you're caught out alone, well, you're going to eat stuff like you always will. And then against higher tiers, well, they're going to get through regardless of having a fighter or not back there. But definitely respectable AA. Maneuverability is really where this ship starts to differentiate itself from the North Carolina and, the other tier 8 premium battleship, the Tirpitz. So if you look, 27.5 knots, 710 meters circle, 12.3 rudder shift. North Carolina, 27.5 knots, 760 meter circle, 17.3 seconds. And then you've got the Tirpitz, which is the fastest of the bunch, 32 knots, 850. She turns big, and part of that just comes from her length. I was talking about this in stream yesterday, and roughly it's like 1.4 times the square root of your waterline length in feet is, in standard displacement mode, the max kind of efficient speed of your ship. And it comes down mostly to wave making force. And that's why when you look at the fast battleships, they really stretch that nose out. They want to increase the waterline length. And that's also why you will see on more modern ships, they've got that bulbous bow under the water. And it's all about playing trickery with those wave-making dynamics to increase the efficiency of your ship. But that turning circle definitely helps, as does the very responsive rudder. And sailing this ship, that is what you notice. Her armor may have some weak spots, but you're so responsive, you can keep yourself properly angled to pretty much all targets. And then the final point is concealment. And it should kind of come as no surprise, 15.7 by sea. Although my North Carolina is 15.2, but I can pretty much guarantee you that it had concealment. Maybe the captain does. No. Interesting. I had not picked that up. The Alabama actually has worse detection, but it does come out on top of the Tirpitz. So looking at the stats, she's a completely reasonable tier 8 battleship. There's no real glaring weaknesses. She shares the similar, side profile. You give your broadside, you're dying, that the Americans have. And I think that's why the Germans are so popular, is because you get away with a lot more. Not because the ships are invincible or have some, super armor that's impenetrable like a lot of people like to believe. But it's just harder to penetrate the armor, and you need to know where you're shooting more. And, when you look at a ship, everyone's pretty much aiming waterline, center of mass. That's where they're hoping to drop shells. It takes a little more to start, coordinating your fire to a location. Now, as far as the captain, I've got Steven Seagal on this ship, and I've gone for preventive maintenance, expert marksman, basic and advanced fire training, and superintendent so far. Now, these two skills really just boost the AA and the secondary range to speak. Superintendent, just for the repair parties, don't really care about the extra planes. Expert marksman, the ship already has decent turret rotation. I like to accentuate that. And that's how I pick a lot of my skills on some ships, is I don't necessarily try to fill in a weakness. I try to amplify a strength. And when you are bow in, moving back and forth, maneuvering, keeping your bow at targets, having responsive guns is very important. And it gets your rear gun around quicker as well. Now, as far as modules go, pretty standard here, I think. Main armament 1, I've gone with AA number 2 to push out that firing range, really give myself a safe bubble. And damage control 1, rudder shift number 2. Now, once again, this comes down to accentuating strengths. It is a maneuverable ship. I feel going with steering gear 2 really accentuates that, gives you even quicker response. Arguably, you could probably go for propulsion mod 2, go for the acceleration combined with already good rudder, but I like to go for that. And then target acquisition. And, well, you know, premium consumables. But that's the Alabama, so let's hop into a game so I can further talk about this ship. So I've picked this battle not necessarily because it's the best example of everything, but because I've got my division mate in the North Carolina right next to me. And the North Carolina is obviously the easiest thing to directly compare this to because it's the other Tier 8 American battleship. And it's a little hard to tell here, but every time I look at the Alabama, I do get a little laugh because it just seems a little squished. The ship isn't quite as long. You can see I keep looking over, trying to look at him, just look at spacing on like the secondaries and stuff to really figure out where the major differences in size come from. But the second thing you'll notice is we're going to a side pretty much alone. And this is always a difficult position to be in. And there's a lot of times a pair of battleships and a single cruiser would do very poorly doing just this. Which, in a way, means it's a very good test. And the way to properly play a side when you're kind of the few and the rest of your team's gone another way is to keep yourself at range. Because you become much harder to hit, and you still manage to keep the enemy from closing, because once they see you, they're not really going to want to close. So far, we've got ourselves a Bismarck and a North Carolina, it looks like. And another Bismarck. And we can't see it yet, but there is a destroyer somewhere over here. So you can see already I'm turning out. I'm never going to sit side on, because that is how you get aced in these American battleships. And you can create a pretty good angle with your hull just by turning out. Now obviously in the North Carolina, this is a risky proposition because that back plate on your Citadel is so thin. You know, it really is going to do better turned in. But if your first reaction is to turn in, you're going to end up really close to the enemy really quick. So now that I've got some space, I am doing just that. I'm getting my nose back in, and I'm going to continue to try to work them over. And just look how tight the turning circle on this ship is. You know, I've got that rudder shift mod as well, so its rudder is super responsive. And the turning is just amazing. Like, I think it was 100 and some meters better than the Bismarcks, or sorry, the Tirpitz, and that says something. And ultimately, the way I would kind of classify this ship is it's kind of got characteristics of both the Colorado and the North Carolina. You know, the Colorado was a little bit slower, but it still had that old hull form that enabled some really quick turning. And the North Carolina is kind of the newer fast battleship. And What's kind of funny is technically the Alabama is newer than the North Carolina as far as naval design goes. I believe the North Carolina was fiscal year 36 or 37, whereas the Alabama was 1938. So it just goes to show you. But the ships are all built for different purposes. So I landed my first decent hit there, and right here, Armored Chimera was, I thought you said we were going in. What are you doing? I'm like, don't worry, I'm just turning. And you really do get to see how tight the turning circle is here. You know, in a matter of no time, I'm able to loop back around and support him. And you'll notice how quick the guns are as well. Like, rear gun, obviously, it was being swung the right direction, but my front guns are also pretty much in place, and those are really two of the strengths, I'd say, for the Alabama, is decently responsive guns and really good turning, and the two kind of go hand in hand. Because if you've got really poorly responding guns, you don't want to be turning a lot because you'll always rip your guns off target. Now, obviously worth noting, I've got Steven Seagal, who has the improved expert marksman skill, so a little bit better boost to the turret rotation. And I feel bad for this Pensacola. First shells, they looked decent. Okay, 2600. Second set of shells, 2 Citadels. Good night. 26,000 damage. Basically a single hit doubling my damage and taking that Pensa almost out of the game. And we obviously also know where the destroyer is. And I'm not too worried getting in close here, because there is a smoke there, but because my ship turns so quickly, I kind of know how I can dodge, and I can't believe that I didn't finish the Pensacola off there. I get a bit lucky there. That Bismarck aims just a little too high and far forward to really hit me hard. And there's the Benson momentarily spotted, so I'm going to get that spotting plane up in the air. And my goal is to go after these Bismarcks. They're going to be some nice big juicy targets. And I don't know what it is with putting spotters in the air of late. It automatically seems to put you at your max zoom, which was really frustrating. But here we go. First Bismarck. He had 19,000 health. 8,000 hit, completely reasonable. You can see I've got my bow coming over to face into those two targets so they can't hit me too hard. I'm watching where that destroyer is, but I'm not super worried about him. Once again, just comes down to I know how quickly I can turn. And it's a really nice feeling in this ship. I finish off that Bismarck, a massive 12,000 damage hit. Armored Chimera hits the other one. I bring the rear turret around, and there's the torpedoes, perfectly in between us. But either way, pretty much would have been turning in time, and he's gone. So I'm going to just keep coming about and kind of loop back to help Armored Chimera. And head back to cap, because there are things going up the middle, and that's always my next worry. We've pretty much secured this side. The enemy team's not coming through here anymore and racing into our cap, so there's no need to stay out here near the edge of the map. I can get back close, back into the battle, and really affect the outcome. And it's right here that we've gotta do some damage. I keep looking for the destroyer just in case. You know, don't want to get caught out by torpedoes, but he's actually run away. A really nice hit there, 16,000, although he's about to do the same to my buddy in the North Carolina. And boy does that hurt, but now we get the chance gets finished off by our NC, and I continue back to cap. So with this lull, let's talk about the ship. Is it worth it? Well, I think you really have to assess what your personal priorities are. Is the American battleship tree, or the American trees in general, ships you want to have? Because if the answer is no, then there's not much point getting the Alabama. The reason you buy premium ships is A, to make money, B, to train captains. And if you're missing that B part, there's other ships in the game for you to get if you want to make money. And this is not a small purchase. And that's the other big thing. These Tier 8 battleships are expensive. You know, you've got other options for the US line if you want just something to train BB captains. The Texas, the Arizona, both potential options, but they're lower tier and they play differently. Whereas the Alabamas kind of have that sweet spot. You know, Tier 8 ships are where the money's made. You can make 500,000 credits, no problem, every game in this ship. Of course, I leave that NC on like 187 hit points. So with our base now secured, this game is pretty much over. So one of the other questions is, Alabama or Tirpitz? Well, the ships play very differently. Obviously the Tirpitz is a lot faster. You know, the 3 or 4, well, 4 knots doesn't seem like a huge difference, but it really does make a difference of where you get and how fast you get there. The guns on the North Carolina or on the Alabama, I would say, are more reliable. And you've got 66% of your firepower up front, you know, and super firing turrets, which allows you to go bow in and not sacrifice too many of your main guns. The Tirpitz has torpedoes. So there's things you have to weigh off, but ultimately, what I would say is the Tirpitz kind of plays entirely like a battleship. You know, it's quick, but it doesn't turn well. It does better at range. If you get in close, you have the torpedoes. The Alabama, I personally feel, is almost a hybrid. It kind of falls somewhere between battleship and cruiser, just because of how responsive its rudder is. It really does let you get in. Well, you don't want to get in, but should you wind up in there in the dogfighting range, you're really able to keep yourself safe. And I've one-on-one Yamatos. Now the Yamato can overmatch the bow on this thing, but if you angle correctly, you can get in there, get the Yamato's side, and pump 9 shells worth of citadels right into the side of Yamato. So the ship can definitely handle her own. So now we're in the post-battle, where we really decide if a premium ship is kind of worth its weight. 404,000 credits, 6,300 experience, 127,000 damage, 1 kill. Now I probably could have had 2 or 3, and that definitely would have boosted my credits. But this is a pretty standard game for me in the Alabama. You know, I've played a dozen or so, and when I look at the average stats, these are pretty close to them. I'm averaging 1.3 kills a game and just around the 100,000 mark. Now, obviously not everyone is, but if you do manage to hit that 100,000k damage mark, you're pretty much guaranteed to be going home with 1/3 credits after expenses. And that's a hefty number. So when we look at the team score, second on the team, Armored Chimera just behind me in third, and I think we played a really big role in that match. Like, 2 battleships and 1 cruiser went to a side, and we took out, 3 battleships, a cruiser, and a destroyer. So we definitely had an impact. We kept a side of the map locked down, and I had a fun game. And that's a lot of what the Alabama's been to me. I don't think there's been a game in this ship that I'm like, that was super frustrating. It's just been fun. And the damage, well, the damage is the damage. You know, did some really good numbers to the Bismarck, the North Carolina. I feel bad for that Pensacola, who I can't believe I didn't manage to finish off. And some lower numbers to a couple more ships. But all told, I used my main batteries, and I did a crap ton of damage. It's what you expect out of a battleship. This is the screen that I'd say really matters. And there's that 300,000 credits. Well, just shy of it. And some decent captain experience. You'll notice I don't really have any boosters on to really jack up what my captain is taking home. Well, I guess I do have a Zulu hotel. But 7,000 is still a very respectable amount of XP for a captain. And once Steven Seagal's a 19-point captain, that's just going to be pumping out, free elite commander XP. So the final verdict, is it worth it? Is it not? To me, it is. I like my American battleships. I've really enjoyed playing this one. And if I had to choose between this and the Tirpitz, right now I would choose this. The games have just gone that way. And I don't know, something about the Tirpitz, while I've had some amazing games in it, you want to get in close and brawl, but once you're there, your rudder's not responsive enough and your turning circle's too big to get you out of trouble. So you can only really brawl when you get in against some other big battleships. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing. And as always, I'm Qckslvrslash, and I'll have another one for you guys tomorrow.